Joining me now, Mike Belshe, the CEO and co-founder of BitGo. Mike, it's great to speak with you. Welcome. I think I have to start with what we've seen across cryptocurrencies. You know, Bitcoin, for example, it's been a big plunge, fast, furious, and fierce, but also perhaps for folks that have been in this market long enough, familiar. How do you see it?
Well, these things don't bother me too much. You know, Bitco's been around since 2013. This is like our fifth, crypto crash, so to speak. Every time there's a real downturn like this, there's a lot of people out there saying negative things, but over the long haul, it always kind of comes back. If you believe and understand the thesis of what's behind Bitcoin, I think you got to believe that this is like actually a good thing. There's a lot of deleveraging that's happening, so then the market can continue to grow.
Yeah. I was speaking to Jordy Visser on my show, and one of the points he made was that he wasn't surprised necessarily to see cryptos caught up in the SaaS sell-off because they're built on code, and everything that seems to be built on code or tied to code, for better or worse, right or wrong right now, seems to be swept up in the selling. That being said, when we talk about that intersection between cryptocurrencies and blockchain technologies and AI, what does that look like and how does it evolve?
Well, look, AI can't touch cash, so I'm pretty sure that AI is going to be using some form of digital asset cryptocurrency. Stablecoins have emerged as a great way to do payments. They're one-to-one backed, they're easily understood, they run 365 days a year. So when you think about how AI is going to interface with us when it comes to money, of course it's going to be digital. At BitGo, we're building infrastructure to make it easier for robots to use wallets, have wallets, and have those, of course, controlled by the folks that are behind those AI bots as well. So this is just emerging now, and it's going to grow.
Yeah. I've heard a number of executives refer to this as the year of utility. Do you think that's how 2026 shapes up, especially when we start talking about all the applications associated with tokenization?
Well, it certainly could be. So we've been talking about use cases for years. Sometimes people say the use cases aren't here, but remember, when it comes to money, it always takes a really long time for things to evolve. So use cases that we do have, of course, we've got store of value, that's Bitcoin, we've got stable coins, and that's payments, just getting started really in the last year and a half. Now the tokenization of real world assets, this is growing like crazy. Just today, I think we have Binance and Franklin Templeton with an announcement. We got BlackRock announcing that they plan to tokenize their shares. These things are coming actually pretty quickly in 2026. Lastly, DeFi also saw some announcements today with Uniswap and DeFi being accessed directly from traditional financial players. So with the regulatory landscape having changed so much in just the last year, finally, everybody feels they can participate in a way that they know that their regulator is going to work with them instead of trying to fight them or tear it down. Innovation is good for the economy, it's good for consumers, it's good for money.
And you are a B2B player in this digital asset market as it grows. You're also a chartered bank, a regulated entity. So what does that enable?
That's right. Look, we're an OCC chartered reserve bank, national bank. It's the same as the status of many of the traditional players that you've been using for literally centuries now. We're doing this because our job is to make sure that people have the utmost trust and confidence with us. It's also part of why we just become a public company, so you can examine everything about the company. You can see our financials. They're coming out at regular periods. This is all about making sure that we've enabled the largest financial institutions in the world, not just the US, but to be able to use the infrastructure of digital assets.
Yeah, and I think you've traditionally operated in the custody sector, but you also have these growing revenue streams, token trading, staking, subscriptions. I realize you're in a quiet period now ahead of earnings, but how do you see these different opportunities growing over the long term?
Yeah, sometimes people call us a custodian. Look, I mean, if you're going to build financial infrastructure, which is what we've been doing now, pretty much longer than anybody, 12 years, you have to start with a really rock-solid foundation. And if you go and draw parallels from the traditional institutions, traditional finance, you'll find State Street, BNY Mellon, JP Morgan, each of which is centuries-year-old organizations. So look, we had to spend time building that low-level wallet custody infrastructure so that we can build the services on top. And so because of that, some people think we're just a custodian, but of course we're not. We're building infrastructure which takes you all the way up into staking, into trading, into borrow and lend, into collateral management, settlement services, stablecoins, and beyond. Overall, the goal is accelerate the transition from the traditional world into a digital asset economy.
And I realize you're only 3 weeks public here. You just had your IPO last month. But being public versus being private, what does that enable?
Well, I can't talk too much about like stock price or things like that. What this is all about is making sure that people can see everything transparent about BitGo. So if you wanted to put one word on digital assets, like what are we doing? It's a blockchain that creates transparency so that everyone can see exactly what's happening, where are the assets, you can prove it mathematically, and then you don't have to have a great financial crisis where you're wondering, where is the bad debt? So for BitGo ourselves, we also need to be very transparent for our clients. Being a public company allows us to do that better.
Yeah, and finally, there's been a lot of focus on the Clarity Act and the fact that that has stalled out here. How important is it to see that make it across the finish line and perhaps other legislation behind it?
Look, I think it's super important. Clarity Act is a complicated bill. It's about market structure. Most people don't understand exactly how markets work, how they piece together to create fault tolerance, to create protections for retail and for institutions alike. But it's super important. There's a lot of folks waiting for Clarity to be passed so that they can come into the market still. So while there's been tons of good news, we mentioned BlackRock, we mentioned Franklin Templeton already, there's even more to come if we can get Clarity done. And then remember, what Clarity does is really, it authorizes CFTC primarily, but SEC also, as the regulators to go define exactly what it means for digital assets. So we have definitions for every other asset class. We've got the largest asset managers in the world recognizing that digital assets are a huge part of the go forward. And so of course, we need to have market structure defined for how we're going to do these things safely.
Yeah, do you have thoughts on how that policy needs to evolve or be crafted to actually get across the finish line and to make this the most meaningful legislation possible?
Well, the legislature really kind of outlines the broad strokes for the regulators to go define the details. So once we get Clarity done, then the hard work of having the regulators go and define the details takes time. And I'm guessing that's probably going to be a 12 to 24-month process, so there's a lot more work to be done ahead of this. But the first step is having the legislature say that this is something that they want to see happen. And then for BitGo, where we sit, obviously being an OCC national bank, we think that we can be a very solid part of that infrastructure, regardless of how it gets defined with CFTC or SEC or whatnot. Of course, we'll roll with the punches. We will always make sure that we are providing the utmost in compliance, regulatory, and safety for our clients.
Okay, Mike Belshe of BitGo. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate it.